At 66, I ended my marriage after 30 years of silence. People will call it selfish, unstable, too late. I believed those same words for decades. But the truth is, leaving wasn't the hardest part. Staying was. And if you're quietly unhappy and telling yourself you've invested too much time, listen closely, because the part that keeps you stuck is the part nobody asks about. Subscribe if you want honest late-life stories that help you clear regret and live lighter. Then comment one word, stuck or free. Before I tell you what finally made me leave, I need to tell you why I stayed. Because everyone asks about the day you walk out. Almost nobody asks about the years you slowly disappear. I got married in my 30s. From the outside, it looked sensible. He was steady, he worked, he paid bills on time. My family approved. People said I was lucky. The problems didn't show up as shouting or bruises. They showed up as quiet dismissal. He didn't really ask what I wanted. He didn't notice when I stopped talking. And every important decision became his decision. Where we lived, how money was handled, what our weekends looked like, who we spent time with, what I was allowed to dream about. Early in the marriage, I still tried. I suggested small things, a class, a hobby, a trip, a job idea. Nothing dramatic. He would listen just long enough to dismiss it. Not cruelly, just like it was childish. And after enough small dismissals, something changed. I started editing myself before I spoke. Then I stopped bringing things up at all. That's how silence begins, not with one big moment, with 100 small ones. Then life gets busy, work,
family, responsibilities, and you tell yourself you'll deal with it later. If you've ever felt yourself shrinking in a room you live in, comment one word, shrinking. For years I made excuses. I told myself marriage is compromise. I told myself he's not a bad man. I told myself I should be grateful. And then we had children, and staying started to feel like a virtue. I told myself they need stability. I told myself I can endure anything for them. So I poured my energy into being useful. If I couldn't be cherished as a woman, I could be needed as a mother. And for a while, that kept me going. From the outside, we looked fine. We went to events, we showed up for family gatherings, we took photos, we played our roles. Inside the house, it was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. We spoke about schedules and errands. We didn't speak about feelings. We didn't speak about loneliness. We didn't speak about the fact that I was disappearing. There were weekends where we barely exchanged more than a few sentences, not because we were fighting, because there was nothing left to say. One anniversary stands out in my memory. People congratulated us. They called us strong. They called us an example. I smiled. I thanked them. I went home and cried where nobody could see me. That's the strange thing about long marriages that aren't abusive but aren't loving either. You can survive them. You can even look successful inside them. And that's what makes them so dangerous. Because if there's no obvious disaster, you keep telling yourself it's not that bad, until you wake up and realize years have passed.
Subscribe if this kind of truth matters to you, because the next part is where I explain the invisible chains that kept me there long after love was gone. And tell me in the comments, just one word, what do you fear most? Alone, money, judgment, time, or change? Some people think you stay because you don't have courage. That's not it. You stay because the chains are invisible. They look like responsibility. They look like loyalty. They look like being sensible. And after a while, they feel like your personality. For me, the first chain was the children. I told myself I was protecting them. I told myself 2 parents in one house was better than 2 parents apart. I told myself I could carry the loneliness if it meant they didn't have to. The second chain was money. Not luxury, not vacations, basic safety. I hadn't built a life that could stand on my income alone. I hadn't kept my work skills fresh. And when you depend on someone financially, you learn to tolerate things you should never tolerate. The third chain was reputation. People knew us as a couple. People invited us as a pair. People looked at our marriage like it was proof that life can be stable. And I was terrified of being the woman who blew it up. I didn't want whispers. I didn't want my family to look at me differently. I didn't want to disappoint anyone. The fourth chain was time. This one is brutal, because the longer you stay, the harder it feels to leave. 30 years becomes a wall in your mind. You tell yourself, I've already given so much. I can't start over now. And without noticing, you begin to treat your remaining years like they don't count as much as the years you already spent. The fifth chain was fear of being alone. Not just living alone, being unseen by the world. At a certain age, you can feel like you're becoming invisible, so you cling to the familiar, even if the familiar is slowly draining you. And here's the part nobody admits out loud. Silence becomes a habit. Once you stop expressing yourself, you forget how. You stop asking for what you need because you've trained yourself to expect nothing. You learn to survive on crumbs, and you call it peace. From the outside, I looked calm. Inside, I was shrinking. Then life got quieter. The children grew up, they built their own lives, and the house became too still. The role that had kept me busy was gone, and suddenly I couldn't hide from the truth anymore. I was sharing a home with a man who didn't know me. I tried to fix it in small ways. I suggested talking. I suggested doing something together. I suggested counseling once. He didn't explode. He didn't threaten. He just brushed it aside like always. And that's when I realized something painful. If I stayed, nothing would change, because nothing mattered enough to him to change. It wasn't a dramatic fight. It wasn't an affair. It was a quiet moment that hit me like a wave. I remember standing in the kitchen one morning, looking at my hands. They looked older than I expected, and in a single second, a thought came so clearly it scared me. If I keep living like this, I will die without ever being fully alive. That sentence didn't leave me. It followed me through the day. It followed me to bed. It followed me into the next week. And the fear shifted. I was no longer most afraid of divorce. I was most afraid of regret. Subscribe if you want stories that tell the truth without shame, because next is where I tell you what I said, what it cost me, and what I gained. Now, comment one word for me, just one. Which chain holds people the most in your opinion? Kids, money, judgment, time, or alone? I said it on an ordinary day. No suitcase by the door, no audience, no shouting, just two people in a familiar house, and one of them finally refusing to fade out. I waited until the evening because I needed my voice to be steady, not angry, not pleading, steady. He was watching television when I sat down across from him. I remember how small my words felt in my mouth before they came out.
And then I said it. I can't live like this anymore. I'm not happy, and I'm not going to spend the rest of my life pretending. He muted the TV slowly, like my sentence was an interruption, not a truth. He looked at me the way he always did when I brought up something that required effort, and he said, "What are you talking about? We're fine." That one word, fine, was the final proof. Not that he was evil. Not that he wanted to hurt me, just that he had gotten comfortable with my silence. I didn't list every grievance. I didn't go back 30 years. I didn't fight to be understood by someone who had stopped trying to understand me. I said, "I'm leaving. I'm done." He laughed at first, not because it was funny, because he didn't believe I would. Then he got quiet. Then he got practical, as if practicality could erase pain. Where will you go? How will you manage? At your age? There it was. The sentence meant to shrink me back into place. At your age. And for the first time, I answered without flinching. At my age is exactly why. That night, I didn't feel brave. I felt sick. I felt like I had jumped off something high and I was still falling. Leaving a long marriage doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like grief, even when the marriage wasn't good. Because you don't just leave a person, you leave an identity, you leave habits, you leave the role you played so long it started to feel like your name. The next days were messy. Some people were kind, some people were confused, some people acted like I had committed a crime. A few said, "You should have tried harder." I didn't argue, because anyone who says that has never lived inside a quiet kind of loneliness. Then came the hardest part, rebuilding. Not the big things, the small things. I had to relearn my own preferences, what food I liked, what time I liked to sleep, how I liked my home to feel. When you've been edited for decades, you don't instantly return to yourself. You come back in pieces. So I started with one piece. I decluttered. Not because I wanted a pretty house, because I needed proof that my life could change. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in years. I found old receipts, old holiday cards, old clothes that didn't fit my body or my spirit anymore. I found things I kept out of guilt. And that's when I learned something that surprised me. Clutter isn't always about stuff. Sometimes it's postponed decisions. So I made decisions, one shelf at a time, one bag at a time, one honest choice after another. I threw away what belonged to a version of me who was afraid. I donated what belonged to a life I was no longer living. I kept only what felt like truth. And every time I cleared a space, something in my chest loosened, because a clear room does something powerful for an older mind. It says, there is still time. Let me tell you what I gained, because this is where people get it wrong. I didn't gain a new husband. I didn't gain a dramatic romance. I didn't gain a perfect life. I gained air. I gained quiet that felt peaceful, not empty. I gained mornings without dread. I gained evenings that belonged to me. I gained the ability to hear my own thoughts again. I also gained something else, respect for myself. Not confidence, not excitement, respect, because I had finally acted like my life mattered. And here's the truth that might sting, but it will save someone. Regret doesn't come from leaving too late. Regret comes from living like you have unlimited tomorrows. If this story hit you, subscribe, because this channel is for people who still want to live with intention no matter their age. Now leave a comment with one sentence. What is one thing you know you need to let go of? An object, a habit, a relationship, or a fear? And if you're sitting in a quiet unhappiness right now, take this one step this week. Clear one small space, a drawer, a shelf, a corner, not to impress anyone, to remind yourself that you can move.